Good afternoon, folks. This is Maggie Rose, and this is the new Concord Hour being brought to you by the Micro Effects Radio Broadcasting Network. We've been having some technological difficulties here. Folks, I had a program that was all planned for today. I had everything up on my laptop ready to go, and all of a sudden my computer has decided it doesn't want to cooperate with me. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn to be a little bit flexible here. I'm very fortunate right now that I am in Northern California with Gary Hunt. You all know Gary Hunt is the one that writes articles and blogs for outpostforfreedom.org. Outpost for Freedom? Of Freedom, I'm sorry. Outpostoffreedom.org. We've all been following his articles regarding the situation up in Harney County and what has been going on with the Bundys and some other situations that have been taking place. He's been doing extensive research. He has been in contact with John Ritzheimer, Ryan Payne. And so what I will do maybe as part of the show tomorrow that I was planning to do today, today's show was going to be primarily all about the situation up in Waco. And being that my computer, which has all the information that I was actually going to give you, is trying to buffer and isn't working. So I'm just going to kind of give you a little bit of a brief overview because today is the anniversary of what happened in Waco. I actually had a relative that was down in Waco at the time that the situation took place. And I also had some soldiers that were down there at the time. They had left my active duty Army unit and the reserve unit, gone down to Waco. They were in the National Guard down there, and they found themselves participating in the Waco situation. They were following orders. They weren't really aware of what they were being asked to do, and they didn't really realize until later what it was that they participated in. As a result of that, 2 of my soldiers committed suicide. So today's date, April 19th, is a day that we need to, and it is the anniversary of the fire and the murder of 80 people that died, including around 22 to 28 children that died there. So what I was planning to do was play the Carl Klein song, which was 17 Little Children. I don't think at the time he realized that there was probably at least 22 children that died, and I was going to read the list off of their names, but I think we're going to say that for tomorrow. I think the day after the anniversary is just as appropriate. But what I would like to be able to do is inform you all that the raid started on February the 28th, and the fire that took place and the death of the 80 people was on April the 19th. That included the 22 children that I know of. It included 1 unborn child and 1 unborn fetus. Now, what's very interesting that a lot of people have noted since then, that it is also today is the anniversary of what happened in the Oklahoma Federal Building. Many people have written about this. We've talked about the line in the sand, and I just listened to a radio broadcast between Gary Hunt, who writes The Outpost, and another gentleman, and in there they were discussing the Waco situation and the difference between a line in the sand and what some people are calling a rope in the sand. So, folks, when we think about what happened at the anniversary of the death of these children, and a total of 80 people altogether, including the adults, and we think about what our government is willing to do. I've seen time and again where the government, when they decide to become aggressive and they decide to make something happen, they usually are hoping to kill 2 or 3 birds with 1 stone. And in this case, they were actually, from what I found out later, one of the things they were hoping to succeed at was the fact that they wanted to push Patriot Act 1. And at that time, Patriot Act 1 was not passing too successfully. And number 2, the BATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, that they were going to be downsized. They were either going to make them go away or they were going to put them somewhere else because, as we all know, they come under the Department of Treasury only as figurehead, but they really have nobody over them. There is nobody really keeping them accountable. And I personally know this because I worked for the BATF for about 6 months. And I worked for their private lab in Oakland, California. If you cross the Bay Bridge, halfway across the bridge, there's Treasure Island and Noche Buena Island. And right there in the middle of that was the Naval Intelligence, and right next to the Naval Intelligence building was the BATF. And as a word processor in the 1980s, I discovered some things about the BATF that were very illegitimate, and I could no longer work for them. Hello, folks. This is Maggie Rose again. This is being flexible here, folks, and I want to thank you all for bearing with me here. The names of the children that perished was Channel Andrade, age 1, white American. The second child was Cyrus Koresh, age 8, white American. Star Koresh, age 6, white American. Bobby Lane Koresh, age 2, white American. An unborn child, Dalen Gent, age 3. Folks, this is Maggie again. Crystal Martinez, age 3, Mexican American. Isaiah Martinez, age 4, Mexican American. Joseph Martinez, age 8, Mexican American. Abigail Martinez, age 11, Mexican American. Audrey, Mexican American. Melissa Morrison, age 6, Black, British. Mayana Schneider, age 2, white American. Aisha Gyrafus Summers, age 17, white Australian. An unborn child, Startled Summers, age 1, white American. Rachel Sylvia, age 12, white American. Hollywood Sylvia, age 1, white American. Serenity Jones, age 4, white American. Chica Jones, age 2, white American. Little One Jones, age 2, white American. Now, folks, there was about 82 people altogether that died, and I want to tell you a little personal story. I grew up in Pleasant Hill, California, and down the street, my girlfriend happened to belong to the Seventh-day Adventist School and Church. And when we were seniors in high school, and I met Carmen, and Carmen and I graduated our high school together. She had originally gone to the Seventh-day Adventist School, and then in her senior year, because her father had passed away, her mother could not afford private education. So therefore, because of that, she had to come to the public school. Because of that association, I got to know some of the people from the Seventh-day Adventist Church there in Pleasant Hill. The lady who ran the daycare center during church services. Now, the reason I'm bringing this lady up is because she's mother of David Koresh's children. She was the mother-in-law of his wife. Her daughter had gone down there to follow her husband, had children with him, and the mother was, the government was saying some things that were, some of them were true, but most of them were not, and she really wanted her daughter out of there. So she sent her younger daughter to go down there to hopefully bring the other sister and the grandchildren out of Texas. Unfortunately, before both daughters and the grandchildren could leave, they were murdered by the federal government. So, folks, after talking to this grandmother and getting some of the inside scoop, basically investigating myself what was going on and what was happening from the other end, Mr. Hunt here himself, when he came back from Vietnam, he was down there in Waco, and he was investigating for himself, boots on the ground, so to speak, and had written some things about Waco. He was also up at Ruby Ridge, and he firsthand saw and heard a lot of what was going on up there. So I just want to be able to state that what happened in Waco was a travesty. And, of course, we all have heard that Timothy McVeigh was the one that was guilty, and he was the mastermind of what happened. And you all have your different opinions of that. I don't necessarily agree that Timothy McVeigh was the mastermind of what happened or that he was the spearhead of what happened. In fact, I happen to know for a fact that he was in a totally different state when Waco, not when Waco happened, but when the Oklahoma Federal Building happened. And he was actually in military training. He was doing some kind of maneuver training. But they needed to have a scapegoat. They needed to have somebody to quench the thirst of the American people and others for basically restitution or satisfaction because of what happened there at the Oklahoma Federal Building. And he was the most logical person for them to go after. He'd been in the military, he was much decorated, and he was very outspoken and angry about what happened in Waco. And I happen to know the details about his wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife, and children. They were literally put in danger by the federal government, and he was told that if he did not just basically silently agree and take the punishment that the American people wanted dished out to someone, that some very bad things would happen to his family. So basically, as far as I'm concerned, he went to his death a martyr. And the real culprits, many of them are still running around the United States right now. Some of them have retired overseas with their nice government federal pensions. I also knew another gentleman by the name of Farrell Montgomery. Farrell Montgomery had been in the Air Force in the AWACS program. Farrell Montgomery was in the Oklahoma Federal Building a few days before the bombings. And I say bombings with an F, because of the fact is that he was there to go to the VA clinic that was there. And he noted that there were all kinds of records all over the lobby of the VA clinic. So there was no place for Farrell to sit down. Mr. Montgomery made an inquiry. And the inquiry that he made, the inquiry that he made to the gentleman that came out, he was a black man in a white coat, nurse's jacket, was why are all these records all over the lobby? And the reason he was given was these were all the records of all the anthrax immunizations and all the shots that had been given to all of the soldiers that had served in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And that they were all being brought there as a repository to be gone over with a tooth and comb, to be picked apart to see, was there anything in these immunizations that could have given some of these people that came back physical problems, like short-term memory loss, women 22, 23 years of age losing their bladder, not able to produce children, and all the other things that came from multiple vaccinations that were given to these soldiers. Many times they were not told what they were given. They weren't allowed to know what they were being given. Their records were taken away. They weren't even given their normal shot record that they could carry with them. I would call this very suspect. So, folks, much of the truth, what really happened in Waco, was put in Oklahoma as a repository. The records on Hillary Clinton and what was really discovered regarding Vince Foster. The information on John F. Kennedy and his murder and assassination that was partially orchestrated by the White House, the vice president possibly, and by the feds was also repository there at the Oklahoma Federal Building. Did you know this? Were you aware of this? Perhaps not. The children that were in a daycare center at the back of the building, the daycare center was moved to the building just days before the bombing. And the daycare was at half the normal capacity at 9 o'clock in the morning, mostly with black children and other children whose parents were secretaries and lowly janitors, people that were considered insignificant. But all the ATF agents that would have normally been in their office at 9 o'clock in the morning were curiously absent, including the FBI. There was only maybe one or two recruiters that did not get the message that they should not be in the building after 8:30 in the morning. The judges and all of their staff were in other places because they got the phone call the night before. So none of them were on the bench at 9 o'clock in the morning. Not one federal judge was on the bench in the Oklahoma Federal Building. Why is it the American people have forgotten about this? Why does nobody care to go back and do the research? Because if you did, you would be angry as I am. You would realize that this government has been playing games with us for decades. And murdering a few children, murdering a bunch of people, it means nothing to them. Well, tomorrow, if we have a chance, we will go into more a little bit about the children in Waco. In the meantime, what I would like to read is what Gary Hunt wrote. The British are coming. This is his article dated March the 3rd, 1993. And I read, Sunday morning, February 28th, 1993, in Waco, Texas, the BATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the armed forces were in place. Both sides are claiming that the other fired. Hello, folks. This is Maggie Rose again, and we are coming to you live with the new Concord Hour being brought to you by the Microeffect Radio Broadcasting Network. We are having some major technical problems today, and I can only assume that maybe it is maybe not on their end or on our end, but somewhere in between. This is not the first time this has happened. This is a very touchy subject. I let a lot of people know that I was going to be discussing the Waco situation today and trying to remind people. There's a lot of you out there that have written me emails that either were not around at the time that Waco took place or were not really familiar much with the story. Some of you are very young teenagers and stuff that have written me and said, we're listening to your show with our grandpa, and we'd really like to hear more about what happened in Waco. So I want to thank Michael and Stephen and Tasha. And also in England, I want to thank Syrie and Monica, who is in the UK. And I also want to thank Ben and his daughter that happen to be in San Francisco right now. I met them the day before yesterday, and we were able to talk briefly while they were traveling to the United States, and they're listening in on the show today as well. I have introduced them to the Microeffect. I met them at Presidio San Francisco yesterday, so welcome. We will try to get back now with what I was reading. This was an article written on March 3rd, 1993 by Gary Hunt. Many of you have listened to him on the radio in the past. He used to do regular live radio, and now he mostly writes, and you can find him by Googling the website that we gave you. As you all know, February 28th, there was a raid that took place on Waco. Now, what was going on here was that a lot of people were deciding that they did not want their Social Security any longer.
Go ahead, Maggie, you're on.
Okay, folks, this is very interesting. Mr. Hunt's computer was knocked down 3 times as was mine, and now the phone lines are being messed with from the other end. Very interesting. As I was trying to read this, the British are coming article to you. So again, we'll go back to February 28th was the raid. Prior to that, some of the people that I knew that were down in Waco had given up their Social Security benefits. They didn't want to collect their Social Security. They did not want their pensions. Some of them had been federal employees. They decided they wanted to live in a situation where it was more of a community cooperative living situation, as that was what was reported to me by some of the family members who lost family and loved ones down there in Waco. The government can't have this. They can't have you removing yourself from their hands. They can't have you removing yourself from their control. And so they had to make an example. It's no different than those people that are able to prove what is going on with the IRS and what's happening with our taxing system. And so therefore, the federal government has to make an example to make people realize that they're not going to tolerate people questioning what is going on in this country. They have to set the example, and that's exactly what they were doing down in Waco. So they ended up doing a raid on February 28th. They tried to say that Mr. Koresh was sexually molesting children. They said that they thought there was... It was actually really... Gary just reminded me, it was actually about guns was the main reason they said. It's interesting, though, because if you had gone in there
and you had looked for all these so-called weapons and guns, then you would have found that there was little to nothing in there. That's what was so interesting. And, of course, they had to burn down the building because they could not allow the investigators to go in there and verify that this was not true. Now, folks, I need to explain to you from a military viewpoint, when you get a tank, as some of my former Guard soldiers did, and you come in and you push a hole through the front of the building, and you come in from the back of the building, and you push in a hole from the back of the building as well, and you end up shooting gas in, they call it CS gas, and you shoot it in from the front and the back. What is going to happen in the middle, folks? Think about it a moment, okay? Now, these children are basically in the basement, lower level floor, underground, for security and protection. Now, I'm not going to be trying to be too terribly graphic here, but just graphic enough. Can you imagine the heat, the intensity? It would be something like a nuclear blast. Your blood starts to boil. Your eyes no longer are eyes. They're nothing but gelatin. This is what happened to these children, these babies. The women that perished there, one was pregnant with a child that was due not very far off. And there was another one which they call a fetus. Folks, this is murder, okay? And tomorrow, hopefully, if I can get into a situation where I will be able to bring up some of the hearings that took place and what Janet Reno, when she was questioned, what she said, the excuses that Janet Reno made, the lip speak that they made as to what they thought they had to do and the purposes they felt they had to fulfill. No, folks, it was about pushing Patriot Act 1 through the House. And then when it came along with the Oklahoma Federal Building, that wasn't enough. They wanted Oklahoma Federal Building to be pushing Patriot Act 2 as well. And they had to wait till 9/11, which if you know some of the stories about 9/11 and the things that happened in the hours leading up to 9/11, if you really were willing to take the time, which some of my family and friends are not willing to do, and do just a little bit of the research, you will discover that these people were coming over on student visas where the government was keeping eyes on them. And they were going out and learning how to fly planes and having private instruction. But some of the instructors were reporting to the classes, to the schools, and reporting to the federal government that these people all of a sudden were only wanting to learn how to take off. They didn't want to learn how to land. They didn't want to learn how to land safely if there was an emergency and they had to land safely, quickly. No, they only wanted to learn how to take off. Now, that right there should have been flags going up, folks. I mean, it doesn't take no rocket scientist. I only have, 3 associate's degrees and a nursing diploma and lots of military classes under my belt. And, oh, yes, I happen to have, a bachelor's, a minor in English, and a major in history. So, but what do I know? I know that if a person's taking classes in flying aircraft and they only want to learn how to take off but not to land, that's a big red flag that would go up for me. So, folks, there was a lot of things around what was going on between Waco and Ruby Ridge and the Oklahoma Federal Building and 9/11 and what happened with Ron Brown and with the little Air Force stewardess and how she died under very mysterious circumstances. But people that I know, when I was questioning one of these close family members the other day, I said, why don't you ever look this stuff up and see what's going on? What is going on with your government? And start asking questions. And he couldn't be bothered. He doesn't care. He wants to be dumbed down. He wants to play naive and stupid. And therefore, because if he doesn't have the information, he doesn't then either in any way feel fearful or concerned, and then he's not going to be asked to do something about it. He won't be asked to write a letter to the federal government. He won't even be asked to vote if he doesn't want to vote. He wants to be dumbed down. He's allowing his children to be dumbed down in public schools. He doesn't care. I even asked, would you be willing to go with me on Memorial Day or Veterans Day? He says, no, I don't go putting flags and flowers at grave sites. Why would I want to do that? He says, those days are only for people to use as an excuse to go out camping and barbecuing and stuff like that. And that was his attitude about it. And I was like, okay. I was heartbroken, realizing how many people we've lost overseas. Many of us have lost loved ones and friends, family members overseas. And these conflicts that are all about money-making. Conflicts all about the war machinery. We were lied to by the Clintons, by the Bushes. We were lied to by Obama. When have we not been lied to? So, back again. Let's start this again. The British Are Coming by Gary Hunt. March 3rd, 1993. Sunday morning, February 28th, 1993 in Waco, Texas. The BATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the armed forces were in place. Both sides are claiming that the other fired first, and the videos of the incident have not been released to allow us to make that determination. Similar to an incident which occurred between opposing forces over 200 years ago, a shot was fired which was heard around the world. By the time the first heat of battle was over, there were a reported 4 dead BATF forces and 2 members of a religious sect, one of which may have been just 2 years old. We found out later there were many 2 years old. We found out there were many that were a year old. The oldest was 17. The youngest was a fetus. And just above that one was an unborn baby. On with the article. 14 BATF forces were reported injured. The leader of the religious sect, Branch Davidian, Vernon Howell, also known as David Koresh, is also reported to have been wounded. Reports indicate that the BATF force of 130 was at the farm of the sect, as they call it, to serve on an arrest warrant to arrest Howell along with a search warrant. The purpose of the search had been reported to be for weapons, and the cause for the arrest was unknown. The defenders numbered about 72 adults. We now know it was in the 80s. The ATF forces had been training for weeks in preparation for the raid. However, a spokesman later claimed that they were outgunned. We question why a law enforcement or tax collection agency trains for an operation. It appears that our police forces have become paramilitary. Our nation has not been able to come to grips with our constitutional republic, so government is resorting to the tactics of the British. The religious group has been referred to as a sect by local people. However, press and government officials have determined that they are a cult. Perhaps not a significant difference in the minds of some, but in the minds of others, very significant in terms of what is acceptable and what is not. This attack follows by just a few days. Numerous raids on alleged tax protester organizations and individuals around the Southwest. In one of the tax raids, the owner of the property was in California, in trial with the IRS over a tax issue. His wife was home alone when IRS agents armed with guns, supported by SWAT teams and television news cameras, chose to enter the house by breaking windows rather than knocking on the door. They seized a number of weapons, but have not reported if they were of a legal or illegal nature. All private records were seized, except those that accompanied the individual into the court in California. From available information, it appears that the warrant was general in nature, i.e. not specific in what or where the object of the warrant was, and what the purpose was of issuing expedition, quote unquote, which result in the destruction of private property and the seizure of weapons that were lawfully owned. Article 4, Bill of Rights, quote, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized, unquote. Perhaps it is time for us to consider the consequences of the actions of the British, which resulted in the world being turned upside down just over 200 years ago. As a result, in the modification of the search and arrest methods of government over the past 30 years, we can only wonder what we can expect in the next few years. We can also wonder whether the actions taken in these incidences were justified or whether they are a process of conditioning the general population to be more tolerant of excessive force by government. That was written by Gary Hunt, March 3rd, 1993. Well, folks, Then after that, of course, as we know, it was on April 19th that the National Guard was given direct orders to attack the building, the main building, on both front and end, and push their turrets into the building and shoot CNS gas into the building. We also know that it's very interesting that 4 of the BATF agents that died in that incident on or about April the 19th happened to have been employed in Little Rock, Arkansas for then the Governor Bill Clinton. They were the ones that were his bodyguards that escorted him to and from the brothel where he impregnated at least one Afro-American woman who was considered to be a prostitute later on. And when he was about to become sworn in as the President of the United States of America, it was mentioned that he had a little boy at that time between the ages of 8 and 12. It was brought up in the news just one time, and then it was killed. I happen to have a sister-in-law who goes up on Yahoo on a regular basis, and she knows that when she reads something that has just been announced over the national news and it comes up on Yahoo, if she sees it in any way at all as something the government doesn't want us to hear about or read, if she doesn't quickly hit print and print it, she knows if she comes back a half an hour to an hour later, that same article is gone, never to be found again. This is what she stated to me the other day in the San Francisco Bay Area. Folks, stop and think about it. The 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto are in place. They control our transportation. They control our Department of Education. They control everything we do, every facet of our life, including our religious practices. They've put all of our churches under 501(c)(3). They're teaching the ministers that if there is a catastrophe, or even if it's a man-made by the government thing where they can declare martial law, whether they can create incidences to cause people to have a revolution, then they can declare martial law, and they tell the ministers, if all of a sudden all the food gets shut down and food is not getting to stores, take your flock and walk them into the FEMA camps where we will give them medical, and we will give them food, and we will take care of you. And some of these ministers are going along with the program because they all, in order to get their tax-exempt status, they are going ahead to get their 501(c)(3), and they are going lock and step just like Hitler's people with what the government is telling them to do. So, folks, if you see an article that comes up about the president, like, having fathered a little black boy, and all of a sudden it's killed, it's gone, it's because they control the FCC, they control the FDA, they control everything. And if those newspaper or those TV news stations or those radio stations want to continue to have a license to practice and do business and earn a paycheck, they had better kill the story, and it better not come back up again. Folks, most of us out here are not stupid. I know I seem to be preaching to the choir, but there's a few out there that have been hearing me just recently for the first time, and there are a lot of these things that you don't know about because you're busy trying to work 2 or 3 jobs to support your families. You're busy running around trying to keep your heads above water. You're dog paddling with your nose above the water line, just trying to keep ahead of the game. So, folks, now all of a sudden, the story's coming out about Clinton's son, and he's a grown man now. But I digress. Let's go back to the 4 BATF agents. That's right. These men were originally the bodyguards for Clinton when he was going to these brothels. They were the ones escorting him back and forth. They knew about his drug running to South America and bringing, drugs in and arms down to South America while he was bringing drugs in with his brother Roger and a few of his friends that worked for him there in Arkansas, in Little Rock. He knew about all of these bodyguards knew about the drug running, but they worked for the governor of the state of Arkansas. So they're dangerous, aren't they? So when he ends up no longer being the governor of Little Rock, Arkansas, but becoming the president of the United States, what are we going to do for these wonderful, loyal bodyguards? We are going to promote them. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to promote them to the BATF. And guess where they're sent? During the siege of Waco. You guessed it. They are sent to Waco. And they were the 4 men that we see climbing up on the ladder and going into the window of that building. And they are the 4 that perished. Isn't much different than what happens in some of our Delta teams. When they're given jobs that basically violate the Geneva Conventions, violate the international laws, when we go into places where we say we never were, and we disavow that we have been there, and all of a sudden these Delta members meet with untimely ends, accidents, so-called suicides. So, folks, it happens all the time. It happens everywhere. And it's continuing today. So this article written on March the 3rd, 1993 by Gary Hunt, little did he know that just a few weeks later, on April the 19th, that those murders were going to take place. Little did he know that as a result of the government, and the government deciding they had to kill 3 or 4 birds with one stone, that all those children were going to end up being murdered. All those adults. Tomorrow, folks, I'll try to get the list of all the names of all the adults. I started reading off the list of the children today as we were having technological difficulties. But I want to cover Waco this week. We've been covering a lot with Harney County. We've been covering a lot with what's going on in the Bundys. And believe me, that story is going to be going on for the next 1 to 2 years. We are not going to forget about the Bundys because, folks, what happened in Harney County is no different than what happened in Waco, what happened with my friend in Ruby Ridge, what happened in the Oklahoma federal bombing, what happened to Lavoy Finnegans. Our government murders people that they consider a danger because of the fact that they are outspoken, because they are credible, because they know what they're talking about, because they are very well educated, very well read, and very well researched. We cannot allow them to have a voice out there. We cannot allow them to exercise the right to redress their government for grievances. We cannot allow them to have a following. So therefore, on February 28th, 1993, they committed a raid. They allowed and informed many of the news media ahead of time, oh, if you want to see something big coming, why don't you come out here? But we're going to keep you way back so you can't really see what's going on. But we're going to kind of feed you information that we want you to put out to the American people because they want the American people to be emotionally swayed. And that's exactly what happened. And the 4 BATF agents that had originally been the bodyguards for then Governor Clinton, later President Clinton, they are the 4 that perished. They knew too much. They knew too much about his background. They knew too much about his secret life. They knew too much about the illegal things he was doing as a governor. It doesn't matter that he found ways to stay out of the military. So we can do a complete show on that one because we got the documentation in the back. And how he went over to learn and be educated while he was living as a guest with the KGB. And the way that he played games with the colonel who went ahead and tore up his draft notice. We all know about that, folks. This is a man who made himself president of the United States. No. We allowed our corrupt electoral government in order to be able to determine exactly who's going to become the president that year. We keep on having people put in office that are criminals. We keep allowing people to be put in office that are not American-born citizens. Folks, this is Maggie Rose, and I'm pissed off. Are you? Are you angry enough? Are you going to cut and run the next time you see there's a shooting like the murder of Lavoy? Or are you going to stand up instead of just a few of us, thousands of us gathering in one place? They can't take down thousands of us. I'm not calling for a violent revolution. I'm calling for a revolution of knowledge and telling them we're not going to take it anymore. I, for one, am not going to take it anymore. God bless you until tomorrow. Down with the New World Order. You elitists, we've got your number. and we're watching.